Welcome everyone. We are at our September 2018 OPA live event with truly gifted astrologer on our panel, Arielle Guttman, who will be speaking about the Venus cycle, Julia Simmers from Australia, who will not be live on the panel. There's a separate link for her presentation, which is, as far as I could see, really informative and amazing with great information. Also on the Venus cycle, Oner Doser is going to speak about the ingress of Jupiter in Sagittarius. Then Gary Caton will speak about Mercury retrograde cycle with reference to the ingress of Jupiter in Sagittarius. And Lynn Bell will speak about the nodes ingressing from Leo Aquarius backwards to Cancer Capricorn. So this is a very busy time. This coming season has dramatic development and alignment that we are, curious about, basically. To begin with, we've had so many retrogrades this year, with Mars having, retrograding in Aquarius, the rarest retrograde. Mars was the closest to the Earth, the past few months. And just as Mars gets out of the retrograde, Venus now slows down, and you can still see her very bright in the sky at sunset. And you see her square currently, Mars in 29 in Capricorn. So you see the bright red Mars, and you see the bright white Venus, pretty much at a 90-degree angle. And yet Venus is going to retrograde around October 8. Can you all see the screen? Let me see. New share. Can you see the chart? Okay, so this is the chart of Venus retrograde, actually on October 4th. And as you can see, it will also be within orb of a square to Mars. Then as we proceed, Venus will retrograde in Scorpio. She will move back to Libra and then return to Scorpio later this season. In November, we also have Jupiter moving into Sagittarius. That's going to happen on November 8th. And interestingly, just as Jupiter moves into Sag, it's going to be a new moon in Scorpio, and Mercury will be on the fixed star of Antares. So it's quite a dramatic entrance into Sagittarius. And last but not least, we're going to speak about the nodes moving into Cancer Capricorn, and Lynn will speak about the mean nodes. You can also use true nodes. Some people use true nodes, some people use mean node, and there's just a few days difference as far as their ingress into Cancer Capricorn. So this is going to, Jupiter will stay for 13 months in Sag, and the nodes will stay for about 18 months in Cancer Capricorn, and with Pluto and Saturn, because it's fun that way. It's more interesting to have, these huge giants political stars conjunct the nodes. So without adding too much, I would like to introduce Arielle, who has done extensive work on the Venus cycle. And Arielle has a book that you should all really check out about the Venus cycle. So I will give the stage to Arielle. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Maurice. I'm very happy to be here on the OPA panel with these fine astrologers today. and our audience. OPA is a fine organization, and I love these live webinars that you do all the time.
Thank you.
So, shall I start sharing my screen, do you think? Now is a good time?
It's a perfect time.
Okay. Let's see. Yes. There we go. And so I'm going to go to slide. If we could get that thing out of the way up on top.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that menu kept dropping down. Okay. All right, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
We see it full screen, and we have about 65 people on board, so we're all excited.
Okay. Hi, people on board. Thanks for coming today. And of course, this will be available by recording later as well. So what I'm intrigued by with Venus, and what I have been intrigued by for several years now, I guess 14 years now, I've been working with the Venus star cycle, the pentagram. When I started working with it, I knew, like a lot of astrologers knew, that Venus creates a pentagram in her orbit. And it's created with the Earth. It's the Earth-Venus dance. So it really is a relationship thing. It's not just Venus by herself, but it's Venus and Earth kind of coming together every so often, every 9.4 months, as it turns out, doing what we call a cazimi, a conjunction, being in the heart of the sun. And what that creates is a lineup of Earth and Venus and the sun, all in a line, all in an alignment. And because it's a 9-month pattern, I like to think of it as a gestation cycle, something that's created inside of you, that's implanted inside of you while you're in the womb at a cellular level, this cazimi of the sun and Venus. And when I started tracing these cazimis, or these conjunctions, what I found, of course, was the pentagram and the star. Now, different people track the 5-pointed star of Venus in different ways. And if you do it from another place, that's okay. You can do it from the stationary retrograde or the stationary direct, or as many people do, the heliacal rise of Venus. As long as you're consistent and you do it from the same place, you will always get the 5-pointed star. But I found in the work that I was doing that the cazimi of the sun and Venus really kind of planted an important seed, like a grain, a seed that grows within us, and that individuals wind up expressing in their whole life. And so every time Venus goes retrograde, which is every 1.6 years or every 584 days, which we're getting ready for now, in the heart of it, in the middle of the retrograde, it will make that cazimi. It will make that conjunction with the sun, the Earth, the Venus, and the sun will all line up. And in this particular season and cycle, it's at 3 degrees Scorpio. So first little flag for everybody is anybody having anything at 3 Scorpio or around there, or around 3 fixed, or around 3 water, or whatever, you're going to get a really strong activation in this cycle. And you're also going to, the whole cycle is important, and I'll show some slides later on that, but I think this is important in the beginning. I just wanted to show some of these images of Scorpio. What does it mean for Venus to be going retrograde in Scorpio, which it does every 8 years. And the last time it was retrograde in Scorpio was 2010, and the time before that, 2002. And, you can just take it back and kind of go back to these times in your life when it was happening. These are some symbols of Scorpio. We have the scorpion with the claws and the tail, okay? And we have the phoenix, which rises from the ashes of its former life and is resurrected, reborn. And we have the eagle that flies high in the sky and has that eagle eye that we often associate with Scorpio. And of course, I think most of our audience knows this, but the rulers of Scorpio are, it's co-ruled by both Mars and Pluto. Now, the two Venuses here are interesting because one of the things that I do with the Venus star is I track whether it's a morning star or an evening star that you're born in, which cycle is it. And this cazimi that we're going into, this Sun-Venus conjunction, whenever Venus is retrograde and it makes that interior conjunction with the Sun, the one that's closest to the Earth, what's produced from that is the morning star of Venus, and she'll be visible in the morning sky before sunrise. Whereas we're just coming out of the last cazimi that we had, that was in Capricorn earlier this year in January, and it produced the superior conjunction, and it was the evening star. And of course, we've all been watching Venus in the night sky almost every night, blazing bright and beautiful in the night sky. Well, pretty soon we'll see her in the morning sky after this retrograde and after this cazimi. But here are two representations of Venus. I mean, most of us are used to seeing Venus in one particular way, and that's this bottom image here, I'll put my mouse here, of the Venus de Milo. And she's considered the love goddess, right? But let me tell you something about her. And that was associated with, the ancients associated the love goddess energy of Venus because she's a dual goddess. She's a warrior goddess and a love goddess. They associated her with the morning star, the retrograde, and the morning star, cazimi. And the evening star, of course, is the love goddess. So the morning is the warrior goddess. Now we haven't seen too many images of this warrior goddess, but I did find her in Cyprus on the birthplace, the birthplace island of Venus. There's a ton of stuff there, and one of these days we're going to have an event on Cyprus with the Venus, looking at all the Venus sites and the museums and everything, and all it's steeped in Venusian mythology and lore, as you can imagine, being considered the birthplace of Venus. So, but what I like about this Venus, besides the fact that she is clearly a warrior Venus, is she has arms. She's armed, but she has arms. You know, the other Venus doesn't have arms. So there's a passive side. There's a very receptive kind of going along with. The warrior is the more proactive Venus. She takes a stand. And that's what the cycle we're going into now is. It's a Scorpio cycle of Venus retrograde, a Scorpio star point, and a warrior goddess that is willing to stand up. And she has arms. She can hug with her arms, and she can also defend.
I have a quick question for you in this regard. Actually, okay. Two questions. How was the non-arm original statue? I mean, was it built this way, or did the arm fell off, or was it the original intention?
Well, I'm sure they've fallen off. No, I don't think it was. I don't think it was this way originally. The statues of the ancients all had arms and legs, and they were whole. But things have broken off or taken.
Do you know what her posture was like? If she, if she looked more graceful, or if she was also lifting her fists like that?
I don't, because we haven't really seen her. We haven't seen her with her arms. So, but just the image of this.
Yes.
Is like it struck me the two goddesses here to get kind of a feeling for the morning star, the evening star Venus, and the idea that the morning star Venus really, look at this stance. I mean, she's also beautiful. She's naked and beautiful and radiant and everything that the other Venus has. And of course, Venus is a symbol of harmony and beauty, but this one is an active. And you know, the Scorpio star point, Venus has been going through Scorpio and Aries for almost 100 years now. It's almost ready to terminate those two signs. They're not really Venusian signs, they're Martian and Plutonian signs. And so in this last 90 to 100 years, the feminine principle that's also ruled by Venus has become very strong, very proactive, very assertive, very empowered. And I think because of Scorpio and Aries being 2 points on the star for this, of the 5 points, you know, that's a lot of energy going, because I think of it as like the invisible cosmic clock that's operating behind the planets. You know, we know where Neptune is and Saturn and Mars and everything else in the sky on any different day. But behind us is this slow moving Venus clock ticking away through the signs and through the seasons.
So how long does a star point stay in a sign?
About 100 years.
100 years.
Yeah, I'm going to show you some more. I'm going to answer this on some of my future slides here. So
and just a quick other question. If you speak of Venus as a warrior goddess and as a morning star, how different would that be from Mars as a warrior archetype? Is there a different quality?
I think of the Venus warrior goddess as somebody who is a warrior to defend and protect those who are unable to defend and protect themselves. And in some cases, fight the fight that Mars won't fight or doesn't fight. Mars has been retrograde for a while. Sometimes Mars is in places that it doesn't act like the warrior. It's not always acting as the warrior. So Venus has this dual relationship, this dual mythology. She was born in 2 places. She rules 2 signs. In astrology, you know, she has 2 birth stories and myths of her creation. But what's really clear about her from the planetary point of view is that we see her sometimes in the morning and sometimes in the evening, but it's the same one. And of course, the ancients always called that either the morning star or the evening star. And they called her a star, the morning star, the evening star, even before people really even figured out that she makes this star pattern. So I like to think of her as our planet star, you know, our star and our planet combined into one. And this is where you see that pattern. This is the Earth-Venus cycle, computer-generated cycle with 8 orbits. And you see in the middle that beautiful, what we call the Venus flower, the Venus rose or the Venus flower. Now all the planets, of course, create beautiful mandalas, but Venus is the only one that creates this pentagram, and that's pretty special because it has, in sacred geometry, it has a meaning. You know, every planet, the way it's placed, the number of years that it orbits, how far it is from the Earth, what cycle it creates with the Earth, they all have different energetics around those particular features of the planet. And for Venus, it's called the golden mean or phi ratio or the Fibonacci sequence. Now this is what we would call this spiral orbit of Venus, this golden mean. Looking at it through time and space is actually the law of synchronicity. It's when things come together. And that's another thing, studying the Venus star, I think you will find that she's the grand mistress of synchronicity. So in this center image, you see if somebody were to, a mathematician or somebody were to draw this, you know, using the straight edge, this is the 5-pointed star. But if it was an artist rendition, it might look more like the spiral because they're actually made up of the mechanics that make them both up. It means the same thing. It's the same kind of thing. And I know a lot of astrologers have been talking about this and the Fibonacci sequence that it creates too, which is a mathematical sequence. And it also has to do with synchronicity, but more importantly, organic growth. Trees and rivers flow in this, and trees grow in leaf patterns and beehives and sunflowers and just all kinds of things. Pine cones have this kind of, and a lot of organic life. Why we like being in nature, I think, because it has all of those beautiful feelings. So it is a beautiful pattern. Here's how we see it if we put it against the zodiac, the 5-pointed star. And that was, of course, the first thing I did when I realized, oh, this is interesting. Here's the star pattern. Now let's see where it is now. Let's see what 5 points it's activating in our heavens, and then came the transfer to the fact that we are human beings with 5 appendages. We've got the head, the 2 arms, the 2 legs, and even on the head, there's a little bit of a fractal here. We have the 5 senses. We have 5 fingers on each hand. We have 5 toes on each foot. So there's this representation of the 5-pointed star that's kind of built within us, and also the phi ratio. When you start measuring arms and legs and distances between different parts of the body, you get kind of the same thing you get on this star. And these become our partners. Like for now, the Scorpio star point that's there, these are our helping hands, the Aquarius Capricorn star. It's really Capricorn now. But if you are an Aquarius star point, you're in this feeding or helping hand position. And the other hand is Leo, the Leo star, or the Virgo. And the feet are the Gemini star and the Aries star. So this is the sequence that it's going around in a clockwise way. After the Scorpio Cazimi, or star point that we're going to have October 26th this year, the next one will be Leo, August of 2019.
So you use Scorpio on the head because it represents the current cycle, not as an absolute.
Yeah, it changes. So the head, next August, the head will be Leo.
Okay.
About 21 Leo. This one's 3 Scorpio. Yeah, so you just look at the pattern. You can apply this in numerous ways, but of course, can't go into all of that right now. I didn't really want to teach the whole mechanics of the star today as much as I wanted to look at this star, introduce it, and then look at it in this retrograde cycle that we're having. Here's another good image, the Venus star clock. This is a synchronization mechanism of the star. It's perfectly timed. And the beauty of it is it keeps coming back. You know, it could have made a 5-pointed star here and then somewhere else and then somewhere else. But no, it keeps coming back to the same point, or just a half a degree to 1 degree to 2 degrees clockwise, lower degrees, because it moves clockwise or retrograde around the zodiac like the nodes do. So it's going against the way that the planets move. So the planets move counterclockwise around the wheel. This Venus star moves counterclockwise around the wheel. It creates quintiles and biquintiles if you're into the 5th harmonic. It also creates the quincunx. There are two signs that are always in a quincunx relationship on the star, usually at all times. And I call them life partners. They may be more joined. In other words, one sign that quincunxes another is a life mate. In every single sign, there's a life mate to one of these signs to another In this case right now, it's Aries to Scorpio. They're locked in together for their orbit. They started in the 1920s with Venus transiting in, and now they're going to finish in the 2020s, those two signs, and then move on. Leo and Capricorn are also joined together on this star. And this is a feature that every time the Venus star comes back around again and repeats these degrees, which it would take 250 years to do, to reach, for instance, this Capricorn arm ahead here, to reach to go full to the next arm, Scorpio, and each one subsequently to the next arm is 250 years. For the Capricorn to return to the full head, it's 1,250 years. But the 250 years, it's not just that the signs are mates. What's interesting about these partnerships that are actually created on the Venus star is that there are certain degrees of the sign that are locked in together too. It's not just any degree of Capricorn to any degree of Leo, or any degree of, at certain time periods, Gemini to Scorpio, but they repeat. It's the same pattern. So it's interesting if you're into researching history and even looking at your own chart and your planets in terms of what historical cycle might they have been in and where did they come up on the star. It's an interesting thing. At least it's interesting to me.
So
I hope it is to others.
Would you agree in some ways that since Venus rules Taurus, and Taurus has to do with our physical body and our senses, this whole numerology around the 5 star, 5 toes, 5 limbs, is basically that Venus represents our incarnation into the physical, and the 5 represents that the physicality of our existence.
I think that's totally correct. I think we are 5-pointed beings. The Vitruvian figure that we're showing, we are star figures, and we are from the stars. We really are. They've told us this for years. We are made of stardust. We are golden. We are from the stars. But this Venus star, what it implants inside of us, that Sun-Venus cazimi before we're born, it plants inside of us the desire to live and what our burning passion is to express in our life.
And it's love. I mean, the sun is love and Venus is love. So this cazimi is a love force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's why I like to use it in people's charts. I mean, certainly they hear enough about Chiron and Saturn and Pluto and all the other challenges that they're being faced with. But when I talk to them about this part of their chart, where is the love? Where is the light? Where is the talent? Where is the expression that they can best use to keep themselves vibrating to this Venus star, sort of in a state of joy, in a state of harmony with the synchronization process of where is the star right now. For instance, it's in Scorpio for this next 9 months. So until it goes to the Leo point. In this last 9 months, it's been in Capricorn. What house is it in? Where does it, where has it shadowed in your own chart? What has it been time on the Venus clock for you to do, for you to take care of? This Capricorn cycle's been pretty tough. I mean, almost, I don't know out there what the rest of you have to say, but the clients that I've been working with and the people in my world that have been consulting with me have found this to be a very tough year.
Yes.
And of course that 1819 Capricorn star earlier this year created a conjunction with Pluto, exactly. So, it's like Capricorn wants you to build the structure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pluto wants you to tear it down. It's really kind of hard to know. Plus, we had the Saturn ingress, we had a lot of other things, but just from the start point, looking at it from this lens, it still was kind of a tough year. The Scorpio kind of continues the Plutonic theme because it's a retrograde Cazimi in Scorpio, but it's getting near the end of this sign, and it makes us ask, okay, here are the 5 points of the star.
So can we say that
it makes us ask, what do we need to kind of release at this point,
So as far as the love force, how would it apply in Scorpio? Does that mean we need to do shadow work to recover that spark and that light? We need to go underground to find the light?
My favorite saying for Scorpio star points is, you either are a shaman or you need a shaman, or a psychologist, or something. But yeah, there's a lot of hidden material. I mean, look, Scorpio rules a part of the body in medical astrology that is private. Everything that Scorpio rules is private. It's the genital area, the sexual organs, and it's the elimination function. Those are all things that we do in private. We don't want people looking in on us, right? We don't want, when we're in the act of sexual activity, or when we're in the bathroom, or in the bedroom, we don't want people kind of looking in. That's the part we kind of keep to just ourselves or very close, intimate other. And so there's a thing with Scorpio, and of course, it's not just the bodily function, it's the whole psychological and emotional. It's a fixed water sign. So it's where we can hold on to a lot of things, patterns, and feelings. Now, the claws of the Scorpion in the most sky maps that I've seen, the claws are reaching over to the scales. So I kind of Libra. So I kind of interpret that as clinging to relationships, clinging to people, clinging to a person, more or less, or maybe clinging to an ideal. Libra can be an ideal too, or it can be a non-human type of thing. But I generally see Libra and Scorpio when there's a lot of charts with Libra and Scorpio. It's usually has to do with this attachment or separation kind of thing that's going on in a relationship. So in the Scorpio retrograde cycle right now, and it goes back to Libra, so we've got the claws of the Scorpion and one of the scales of Libra in this retrograde cycle right now. So I think, yeah, we are going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at maybe what we've committed to. I think every 1.6 years when Venus goes into its retrograde, I see it finishing the last retrograde loop, which we started in March of 2017. See, we're being fed by this Aries, March of 2017 that happened. And now this is the next one of October of 2018. So it's a loop. And Gary made beautiful little loops and spirals of the Venus retrograde dance, and I forgot to put them on here, but he's got these images that are gorgeous. So it's a retrograde, it's a spiral, it's a loop, it's a dance, but I kind of see it that's like that spiral as it's kind of winding down that March 2017 cycle, finishing it up, letting go of whatever needs to be let go of, and now picking up new material for this next 584 days, the Scorpio cycle, to by the time it gets to its very next retrograde, which will be Gemini 2020, June of 2020. So yeah, so each period has its, like they say, there is a time for everything and a season for everything. So this season we're in the Scorpio morning star season. And we have to look to where that is in our chart and how we would work with that personally and what kind of maybe commitments. You'd have to say Venus is attachments, but also commitments with Libra, and maybe about resources, maybe about relationship, maybe about contracts, maybe about property. I've heard a lot of people suddenly, after many years, saying, I feel like I want to let go of my property. I want to go somewhere else now. I want to be free.
That would be very Scorpio indeed, that kind of reinvention. We need to close, Arielle. So
okay.
I was wondering if you have last comment as a conclusion. Obviously, as you mentioned, the need to look at it in our birth chart, where that 3-degree Scorpio is going to be.
Okay.
And then the opposition to Uranus obviously is going to play into this. Any last comments?
Yeah, I wanted to show this slide. This Scorpio, this is a magazine that came out, and I thought, wow, are they in tune with this fall 2018 Scorpio? I mean, the cover says, go fierce for fall, make a bold statement this season. And I think of that as the colors are very Scorpionic, and I think of bold and fierce and deep and rich with layers is also Scorpio. So I wanted to say that. And the one last thing I would say here is that the Dalai Lama is a Scorpio star point. And he's let go of a lot. And I really believe that he's one of the highest manifestations of the Scorpio star point sign, Kazemi, that I have looked at in his ultimate act of, of forgiving, the people that have occupied his land. His people have demolished so many of the sacred temples in Tibet, the Chinese. Now, he's got an interesting Venus configuration, as you can see here. He was put to the test. His natal Venus at 28 Leo, the Venus star point at 26 Scorpio, and they're both in a direct relationship with Algol. I was going to say for this time period, the retrograde, and I only found this slide later, but I was thinking maybe we should think how Buddhists think now. Maybe we should get into a place of non-attachment, of releasing, of just kind of clearing the space, using the Scorpio cycle as just kind of cleaning out, purging, cleaning out, letting go of whatever's, in the field that's cluttering the field and the vision to get to our core, deep, soulful energy. Because Scorpio is the soul, and it is a time when we want to make connection with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will show some slides here that refer to what you were saying. I will just go to my desktop. So here is for the Dalai Lama. What is forgiveness? It's the fragrance that flowers give when they are crushed.
Oh, wow.
So I think that speaks to what you were describing with Dalai Lama. And I just wanted to show an illustration of the chart of Venus, the upcoming Venus star point. So if people, it's going to happen on October 26th. And if you want to know what your star point is, you need to look at the Venus-Sun conjunction prior to your birth. And buy Arielle Guttman's book on Venus, and you'll find, extensive information about this cycle. And
go to my website. There's a link right there where you can find your star point.
Wonderful. And this is the last slide with the January Venus Sun superior conjunction at
Mm-hmm.
18 Capricorn conjunct Pluto almost to the minute, like 4
Right,
minutes off. Now,
right.
I just want to ask you a last question. Some people use inferior and superior conjunction. Some people use the term interior and exterior. Is that what do you prefer?
I'm changing. I'm trying to change to interior and exterior because it does sound inferior and superior do sound more like value judgments than
Mhm.
what I know that it was meant to be, the astronomical term that it was meant to be. But I know some of the language is changing. Listen,
Yeah,
Venus star point wasn't even in the astrological lexicon 20 years ago, so I'm glad to be contributing to that. But also, I think we can update some of the older terms without losing respect for what the ancients meant by it. But we can always also define that, when we say interior conjunction, like this one is going to be, it's also inferior conjunction.
wonderful. Thank you very much. And we look forward to this cycle. We'll take notes. And everybody that is with us today, just also keep in mind that all our panelists here have also written an article about their particular presentation, and it's going to feature in the next Career Astrologer magazine coming on the equinox.
Great.
Thank you, Arielle,
Thank
and
you. Thank you all.
welcome, Oner. Oner, I'm unmuting
Can you
you.
hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Now I'm gonna share my screen.
So as you do so,
Now,
I will introduce Oner, who is an astrologer from Turkey and has done extensive work merging traditional astrology with modern astrology, doing a lot of research also on Ottoman astrology and lecturing around the world about his findings. So Oner will speak about the transit of Jupiter in Sagittarius, and it's a big event because Jupiter is always a big event, but it's this time also in its own sign of Sagittarius. And we have consequently both Saturn in its own sign and Jupiter will be in its own sign for a whole year. Go for it, Oner.
yeah, I will, but I cannot share my screen at the moment. I'm trying to do
Okay.
and pressing, but I cannot.
So I have your slides. Maybe that
Yes, can you please show them? And
just a moment.
I'm saying share, but
Share screen.
oh yeah. Is it, thank you, Maurice. So yes. All right, thank you. So, hello everyone. It's nice to be here with so professional astrologers and with all the participants. Tonight, I will be speaking about Jupiter in Sagittarius, Jupiter square Neptune, but also will be speaking a bit about Saturn and Capricorn as well. And I want to
So tell me when you want to move the slide.
Yes, thank you, because I cannot do it. First slide, please. Thank you very much, more. Sorry about that.
I'm your hands and
Oh, yes. Thank you. You have me in your hands. Yeah, so here we see the entrance, the ingress of Jupiter into Sagittarius, which is his home. Jupiter is the planet of opportunities, expansion, and good luck. In traditional astrology, also, it is related with money, and all the banking system, actually with capitalism as well. But also we see that Saturn in Capricorn in his own sign, and Neptune in Pisces in her own sign as well. So, of course, when planets are in their domicile, in their rulership, they are like captains in their own ship. So they can do whatever they want without asking anyone else, like a man who is at his home and has not to ask to someone else about what to do at home. And when we see Jupiter in Sagittarius, of course, what comes to my mind, foreign travels, religion, moral values, beliefs, higher education, ethics, international relationships, etc. And Jupiter's unifying and expanding power is reflected in religious issues as well. And tonight I will show some slides about the Jupiter in Sagittarius transit, but also Neptune in Pisces, because they are all related with spiritual issues, but also religious issues. Religion is a system which brings higher awareness to the people regarding to their role in the universe and guides them to connect with the universe. And when we say to connect with the universe, what comes to my mind is Neptune, especially in Pisces. But also, this is Jupiter's ability. So, can you pass to the next slide, please, Maurice? So, in history, when Jupiter in Sagittarius and Neptune in Pisces, of course, it's happening every 164, 65 years. But I want to talk about 1521 and 1686, 87, and 1852, 53 years tonight. So next slide, please. First of all, I want to talk about Martin Luther a bit. I'm sure everybody knows about him. And in January 1521, Pope Leo X excommunicated Martin Luther, who was starter of Protestant reform, and just 3 months later, Luther was called to defend his beliefs more before Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, and at the Diet of Worms, which we see the chart. Can you pass the next slide? Yeah, here we see the date of the event, 28 January 1521. And inside we see Martin Luther's chart, and we see many planets in sign Sagittarius, Mercury, Neptune conjunction, and Uranus is there as well. And we see that on 28, 1521, when he was invited to Diet of Worms, the transits was like that, and Neptune was squaring his Mercury and Neptune as well. And transiting Jupiter was exactly on his Uranus. And of course, on his return from Worms, he was seized and lodged in the, I think, Wartburg, the elector's fortress. And during the year he spent there, he translated the scriptures and composed his cogent controversial trace, which is called Refutation of the Argument of Lithimus. And the next chart, please.
So one more.
Yeah, one more. Can you pass the slide?
I
So
have. Do you see it?
yeah,
Ulrich
yes,
Zwingli.
yeah. And I want to talk a bit about the Zwingli's chart. He was also at the same time, and as you see in his chart, many planets in Sagittarius and Jupiter is passing over them. And of course, Neptune is again scoring all the planets in there. And
So can you
the,
remind the audience who Ulrich Zwingli was?
yeah, actually, he was a priest, and he was in the Reformation movement within the Germany, and diversified almost immediately. And after Reform movements arose independent of Luther, and living in the canton of Zurich, Reformer priest of Zurich's main church, Zwingli, built a Christian theocracy in Zurich in which church and state joined for the service of God. So it is almost, um, he was almost born at the same time, almost the same time with Luther, and he was taking almost similar transits at the same time.
So he
And
was also a reformist as Luther was.
yeah, he was also a reformist at that time. And uh, on April 29, 1521, when a vacancy occurred among the canons of the Grandmaster, Zwingli was elected to fulfill that vacancy on that day, and in later years, the city government approached Zwingli's reports, and Zurich became a Protestant city. So this is another um, reformist man at the same time. So we see some reforms in religion at the same time with the
Mhm.
Neptune Jupiter square. So can we pass to the next one?
Spiritual awakening.
Yeah, please, thank you. And now I want to talk about
Oops.
Loyola's chart a bit.
Wait.
While defending the citadel of Pamplona against the French, Ignatius was gravely wounded with the hit um, by a cannonball on May 20, 1521, and sustaining a bad fracture on his right leg and damage to his left. So this event closed the first period of his life during which he was, on his own admission, a man given to the vanity of the world, whose chief delight consisted in martial exercises with a great and vain desire to win renown. So, can you pass to the next slide, please? And after this transit, after this day, it is the second period of the in Ignatius' life in which he turned toward saintly life, which is we know him better. And after treatment on Pamplona, he was transported to Loyola in June 1521, and there his condition became so serious that for a time it was thought he would die. While recovering, Ignatius Loyola experienced a conversion. Reading the lives of Jesus and the saints, he made Ignatius, all these made Ignatius happy and aroused desires to go to do great things.
So you say he had a spiritual revelation
Yes,
following his accident, following his
yeah,
wound.
yes, exactly. And over the years, Ignatius became expert in the art of spiritual direction, and he collected his insights and prayers and suggestions in his book, which was Spiritual Exercises, and one of the most influential books. on the spiritual life ever written.
Mhm.
So it was a kind of spiritual enlightenment, awakening. So he
So
was
that
very,
was the same time as the wound,
yeah,
because you
yeah,
have the
yeah.
chart of the wound.
And again, as you see in this chart, he has Mercury and Neptune in Sag, and Neptune squaring all these planets in Sagittarius while Jupiter is transiting them.
Yes.
So to the next slide, please.
Discovery of Guam.
Yes, please, thank you. And what else did we have on that year? Of course, when we uh, talk about Jupiter in Sagittarius, we are talking about discoveries of new countries, new places. So in this year, between March 6, April 7, um, the Ferdinand Magellan discovered all these places, and he discovered Guam and reached to Philippines and take possession of Homanon and Philippines, as I know. And the first mass in the Philippines, in generally believed to have been held on the island of Limasawa, but may also have taken uh, place on Maso in Bhutan. And then the Magellan's fleet reaches to Cebu at the same time. So we see again, can we pass the chart? Next slide. Again, we see many planets in Sagittarius in his chart here, and they are taking Jupiter's transit again and squared by Neptune. So these were um, almost the same ages, very close to each other. They were taking transits from Sagittarius, and of course, transiting Neptune was squaring all these planets, which is very interesting, actually.
Yes.
And to next slide, please. And I want to talk a bit about the next phase with, again, Jupiter in Sagittarius and Neptune in Pisces.
So
It was,
just a note, Oner.
yeah.
We're halfway through, so I just want to give you a hint of the time
Hmm.
for your slides.
Yes, sure.
So we move now to the next phase where we had
Yes,
been Jupiter Neptune square.
yes. Again, it was around 1687. So Isaac Newton's great work, Principia, was published and outlines his laws of motion and universal gravitation. And the year 1687 is considered as in the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment by the historians. The book of Principia, which was published in this year, is considered to be one of the most important books of the history of science at the same time. So can we pass to the chart of him?
Oops.
Yes, here again, we see he has Mercury in Sagittarius and he has Jupiter, Saturn in Pisces squares to each other. So at this time, Jupiter was in Sagittarius and Neptune was in Pisces. And Isaac Newton, who reduced God into his mechanic system, believed that Christianity should be saved from mysteries. And his invention of gravity annoyed some of the scientists. They thought that such invention were against the dominance of God. However, according to Newton, God was the center of the whole system because such a system could not exist without the presence of the mechanic. And love of gravity was not against God.
Well, it's interesting to look at the chart that he was born in the opposite,
Yeah,
with Neptune in Sagittarius
yeah,
and Jupiter in Pisces, and he had the reverse transit of
yeah,
Jupiter in Sag and Neptune in Pisces.
yeah,
And as you
exactly.
say, this combination, bringing God with
Yeah,
the the mechanic system of gravity, you see Jupiter
yes,
and Saturn conjunction.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And um, of course, that can be some other example. We can find some other examples, but all these examples are showing us that Jupiter Neptune squares, especially when they are in the sign of Sagittarius and Pisces, and of course we are finding some people who has planets in those signs. We see some developments in the field of spirituality and religion. This is what I want to tell actually, because uh, we will have Jupiter in Sagittarius again, and we have Neptune in Pisces at the moment. So before to predict what is coming, we have to see some samples from the history. This is why I wanted to show these charts. And if you can pass to the next slide, please. This is from 1853, um, the first Buddhist temple in America. And uh, actually, Buddhism in America began emerging in 19th century, if I'm not wrong, and courtesy of Japanese laborers who went to Hawaii to work in the sugarcane fields, and Chinese workers who came to California during the gold rush. But the first Buddhist temple in America was built in 1853 in San Francisco's Chinatown by a Chinese Buddhist fraternal group in summer 1853. So can we see the chart? Next slide. Yes, here again we see Neptune in Pisces, we see Jupiter in Sagittarius. Of course, this is not the exact date because I couldn't find the exact date, but in summer 1853, Jupiter was in Sag and Neptune was in Pisces.
On the nodal axis also.
Yes, actually, exactly. So please, next slide.
So this is now January 13.
Yes.
And
So this year, in 2019, we will have Jupiter in Sag, Neptune in Pisces. Of course, they will be squaring to each other by sign, but the exact squares will be in January 13 and June 16. So the next slide, please.
so this is the ingress of Jupiter.
Yeah, yeah, this is the last one. Yes, as I told you in the beginning of my talk, three planets in their own sign, not Jupiter only in his own sign. So when planets are in their own domiciles, yes, they are strong, but sometimes they can enhance their shadowy side as well. So here, during the Sagittarius period of Jupiter, ideals may be higher and hard to reach, and our targets may become larger in size, even in utopian nature. This is the shadowy side of Jupiter. Of course, we can tell many things about the powerful side of Jupiter, but tonight I want to talk about the shadowy side of him. And of course, with those utopical ideas, Jupiter in Sagittarius, we don't have to forget that Saturn will be in Capricorn again, bringing a practical and grounded perspective. And of course, the square between Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter in Sagittarius may reflect fanciful goals and ideals may tend to be too adventurous, too hopeful, or overly optimistic as well.
So there's a
And
tendency with Jupiter square Neptune to lose boundaries and
yes,
get
exactly.
carried away with our ideologies. So do you expect this to also happen on a political level where,
Exactly. On the
you know,
political level, on the economical level, and on our expenditures, of course, we will see in our bills, most probably. And uh,
what
exact,
about our gains?
our what?
Our gain, making money.
Oh, sure. Jupiter gives that chance, but if we can look at the realistic side of this phase, because we have Saturn in Capricorn and Jupiter in Sagittarius, one sign before him. So this means if we remember from new moon and full moon, this is the lunation cycle. This is valid for all the planets. So this is a balsamic phase between Jupiter and Saturn. When these two planets are in balsamic phase, there are some struggles, problems in the economy in general. Actually, Jupiter is related with financial issues in general, banking system, but on the other side, Neptune is related with bankruptcy. And with Jupiter Neptune square, we will probably see inflation and deflation and speculations in the markets as well. So this is the problematic side of Jupiter in Sagittarius, to exaggerate,
Yeah.
to
So I
use,
have a question for you.
sure.
Many people predicted when Saturn will get into Capricorn that there
Mhm.
would be difficult economy. And we see that there's a lot of tension, especially with Trump and China and Trump and the European Union. But the economy is doing better now. I
Mhm.
mean, there are more jobs, at least on the surface.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, on the surface, you're
maybe,
right.
maybe, this will enhance things
Uh-huh.
and not necessarily deflate them, or both.
Actually, what I'm thinking, I cannot say that the economy is going well in Turkey, for example.
Okay.
And for example, dollar is rising up, and all the economy is not in good
Okay.
situation at the moment. But what I'm thinking, of course, Jupiter is the last planet in fire sign before 2020. And of course, we will have Uranus in Aries for a while. But
Hmm.
beginning from 2020, we will not have any planet in fire signs.
Mm.
We will have many planets in Earth and eclipses in Earth and water signs, and we will have Neptune in Pisces as well. So I think this will be the last uh, time
To go
when
crazy.
people, yes, will take some risks. But after that, I don't think people will take that much risk. But in this period, yes,
Oops, I'm
people may
sorry.
take risk, and this may be a time of inflation, of
I
course.
see.
And what is another problem of this phase is fake gurus. Because as we told before, Jupiter is related with beliefs and religion, and with Neptune, this is spirituality, but there is a square between them. So this is another problem that I think we will see some fake gurus
So
around.
do you think they will bust us? They will find us?
I don't hope this. Of course, I don't. Sure, but we have to be careful about it. And the economics, about the economics, of course. Jupiter rules the bank system, banks in general, and the stock market. And when we have this square, of course, we will see some speculations and diversions in the stock market. And prices, as you said, which have been increased by speculation, may fall in advance. So this may create a disintegration in economics as well. This
So
may
you
be a
see
problem.
Jupiter ruling banks?
Yes, in mundane astrology, traditional astrology in general, Jupiter is related with banks and the stock market in general.
Okay.
And when we are speaking about the economy, we look at the aspects between Saturn and Jupiter.
Okay.
So they at the moment they don't have any aspect. They are powerful in their own signs, but this is a balsamic phase. And of course,
Semi-sextile.
what is interesting in traditional astrology, when a planet is a diurnal planet, like Jupiter is a diurnal planet, Saturn is a diurnal planet, and the Sun is a diurnal planet. When a planet in a diurnal sign, it works well. When this is his own sign, of course, it is better for him. Let's say Jupiter rules both Pisces and Sagittarius, but of course, he feels better in Sagittarius because a diurnal planet and Sagittarius is a diurnal sign, a masculine sign. And what is more, Jupiter in his own tripless city, according to traditional astrology, in Sagittarius, but Saturn is not. And what else? Saturn is a diurnal planet, but Capricorn is a nocturnal sign. And Saturn is a masculine planet, but Capricorn is a feminine sign. So Jupiter is more powerful than Saturn in this placement. So I say people will still be optimistic, and the expanding nature of Jupiter will be over, of course, the pessimistic uh, attitude of Saturn in this phase. What else? Jupiter rules Neptune, although they squares to each other. Neptune is ruled by Jupiter as well. And when a planet rules the other one, that means that ruling planet dominates the other one. So in this relationship, although there is a square between them, Jupiter is more powerful than Neptune. So I think this will enhance feeling of
Enhance.
joy and optimism, mirth, and enthusiasm. Of course, this is good for every one of us before 2020 because we will have many planets in Earth sign. So this is,
Thank
uh,
you, Oner.
yeah, you're welcome.
And just on the mention of what you're saying, for everyone, we will experience a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. They're now in the balsamic phase as Jupiter approaches Saturn, but they will
Mhm.
actually meet on December 20th or 21st, 2020. So
Yeah,
we're approaching that big conjunction, and it's going to be the last time a planet is in a fire sign for quite a
yeah,
while. And as it squared Neptune, we can expect a lot of inflation and deflation
mhm.
in every theme that is related to the sign and the houses it's in your chart. So pay attention to where Sagittarius and Pisces are in your chart. And these are places where you can experience spiritual growth, but also deception and deflation.
Yeah,
So thank
yeah.
you. Uh,
You're welcome.
We really
So,
appreciate that. Last words?
sure. Pay attention to escapism. and avoid highly idealistic and utopical idealism, and instead focus on how to actualize and put those ideas into grounded practice, I would say. And do not avoid taking responsibility during this time because of that Jupiter-Neptune square. However, you should not take on too much responsibility. And I would say,
I never do that.
yeah, of course, everyone. During this period, we are open to be absent-mindedness, confusion, and instability. So it may be that the bad decisions are even actually better than indecisiveness. So follow your heart and be decisive, be authentic, even if you make mistakes. These are my last words.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Thank you to everyone.
And we see very different energies from the Venus transit to the Jupiter ingress, and yet they happen at the same time. This is why we're having this panel, because these are the trends that we are going to experience in the next quarter, from October to January and even into 2019. So pay attention to how these different planets are actually serving as layers to what we are going to experience from Venus retrograde to Jupiter in Sagittarius. And we're continuing now with Gary, taking another perspective on Jupiter.
Throw another wild card in the mix here. With Mr. Mercury. All right, are you ready for me to share, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Sir. Awesome. Here we go.
You're a little echoing.
Okay, let me find the volume here. Is that better?
I think so.
Okay.
We see your screen.
So we were talking about planets making their last movement through fire signs. This is also true for Mercury. Mercury will make the last retrograde in a fire sign until 2024, this fall. This is a cycle that I have been following very closely. And of course, it's intimately related to Jupiter's ingress to Sag because they will be co-present. So let me just get this, if I can get this view to full screen. There we go. So this is a glyph that I made up for Mercury to show the six-pointed star. Venus has a five-pointed star, but with Mercury, it's a six-pointed star. And also, these three crosses below represent the three retrogrades of each year. Wow. So I just wanted to start with like a symbol of what we're going to talk about.
Powerful.
This is a bit more involved here. I cannot go too far, but remember, with inferior and superior, we're not necessarily talking about value judgments. They are derivatives of the Latin words meaning above and below. Yeah, so that we mean really between the Earth and Sun or on the other side of Earth and Sun when we talk about inferior, superior. So each month, Mercury does this dance where he's invisible and then visible. Morning star, superior conjunction. Evening star, inferior conjunction. Similar to what Venus does, but in a six-pointed dance rather than five. And forgive me, I'm going to have to go through this fairly quick. Also, rather than making a relationship of phi, like Venus does, Mercury makes about the relationship of pi. So if you follow any of these events, right, with Mercury, with Venus it's 584 days between any two events. With Mercury it's on average 116. and we divide this by 365 days, we get about pi. So that's a very interesting relationship. And what this means is that functionally is that we get 3 retrogrades each year for about 3 weeks each. So with Mercury, everything happens in threes, yeah? And also this means that Mercury spends an incredible amount of time in these 3 signs compared to speedily going through the others. Spends 68 days. That's a really long time for such a speedy planet, right? So we should pay attention to these particular signs each year. These are ones that there's going to be a lot of stirring up of energies in these 3 signs. And in particular, this year, we had a retrograde also in Sagittarius last fall. We had one in Aries earlier, and then recently in Leo, and again in Sagittarius. So there's between 4 and 6 retrogrades fall in the same element. And then it switches to the next element. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But also this next inferior conjunction of Mercury will happen alongside Jupiter, right after Jupiter ingresses. As Maurice mentioned, when Jupiter ingresses Sagittarius, Mercury is on this magical fixed star Antares, and then he will turn and the 2 of them will meet at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, I'm not going to be going into the big, long historical cycles like Mr. Oner did, but what I found is that the last time, this has only happened, these tables you can see are from my new book, which I'll talk a little bit more about. These 3 things, that's a Sun, Mercury, inferior conjunction, along with Jupiter in Sagittarius. This has only happened one other time in the entire 125 years of ephemerides that are in my book. So this is relatively rare. We're not going back many hundreds of years, but within the last 125 years, this has only happened one other time. So this is very interesting. So this is just showing you that these 3 signs are going to be activating a particular group of 3 houses in your chart and your client's chart, yeah? So these are 3 areas we want to pay attention to.
So just to clarify for our audience, this basically represents the sign where Mercury was retrograde this year. So it was retrograde in fire sign in the course of 2018, and it's going to be the last one in Sagittarius in November. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Now, and this follows a pattern. This pattern has been well known since at least Aaron Sullivan's seminal book, Retrograde Planets, back in the 90s. She had a section in there about this. I think also, let's see, what am I thinking of? Ruperti also talked about it a bit. But these retrogrades go through the elements in reverse order, which is really fascinating. So they go from fire to water to air to earth, which is the reverse zodiacal order, right? So we have a year and a bit in fire, and then after that we'll see the retrogrades happen in water, and then after that in air, and after that in earth. And what this means is that every 6 to 7 years we have a recurrence of a particular element. So if we go back 6 to 7 years, we see that the last time Mercury was doing the retrogrades in fire was in the 2010 period. What's fascinating about this, notice that the first one there was at 29 Sagittarius near the winter solstice. There was also a lunar eclipse near that degree. And one man, a street vendor, right? So Mercury, set himself on fire in protest in Tunisia, and he set the entire, really the entire world on fire. Certainly that region was literally on fire politically. We came to call this time the Arab Spring, right? So you can see this volatility. This is a collective force, right? This is not the way we're used to thinking about Mercury, that Mercury is something, you know, personal and, oh, it's about the technology and whether you're going to make it to your appointment on time and so forth. This is much bigger picture, actually. So
I agree, and I'm glad you bring this up because we tend to completely diminish the function of Mercury and, you know, reduce it to communication only when it really rules all our
if I may say so, to the point where we say there will be no more planets in fire signs, what we really mean is no more of the slow-moving planets. But we kind of discount this guy like all the time, you know.
Agreed. And
so it's I've made it sort of my mission to get him back into the conversation.
Great.
And so one cycle later, we're back at this same place, and we have this inferior conjunction of Sagittarius, of Sun, Mercury with Jupiter in Sagittarius.
And one other thing, Gary, about Mercury, and I wonder if, you know, how you touch on that, but we often also speak about Mercury only when it's retrograde.
Yes.
You know, when it's direct, it seems like no one cares. So you speak about here both the Cazimi inferior and superior interior exterior conjunctions, correct?
Yes, and also, as you can see in this table, I'm mapping the visible. This is a bit much to go into without, you know, having a whole nother presentation, but these columns on the side also represent the Cazimi happens and it's invisible, right? Any planet that is within 15 degrees from the sun cannot be seen. Venus, it's closer to 10 because she's so bright. But when a planet is exactly with the sun, you cannot see that planet, it's invisible. What's incredible about Mercury is that the highest and brightest alignment, we call that maximum elongation in the evening sky, the conjunction that's invisible, and later the maximum elongation in the morning sky. So you have these incredibly visible events. They line up perfectly with the invisible events. So you have 3 events within a period of about 40 days. So it's a new way of framing the retrograde, actually, and the beginning and the ending points of this thing that I go into. But yeah, it's important to know that when it passes these degrees of the conjunction the first time, it's very high and bright. So you can actually, because it's high and bright, you can actually see, you can actually get a sense of, oh, something is happening now. I'm getting literally a heads up about what is coming in the next retrograde. Or at the end, I'm getting a chance to review and to reformulate myself going forward, knowing what I know now from having the retrograde adjustment, yeah?
So you mean really that when the planet becomes visible, either prior to the retrograde or after the retrograde, that heliacal rising is the moment of realization. It's a moment of, you know,
that's also a very important part to follow. Yeah, that happens right at about 15 degrees. These maximum elongations are further than that because Mercury is one of the hardest ones to spot. They happen anywhere between 18 degrees and 27, depending on the cycle. But this would be the highest, most visible Mercury. Okay. And in the evening, the highest, most visible Mercury in the morning, and the most invisible one at the conjunction, they all happen in the same degrees every single time. So that's what these tables represent. So in fact, what you're saying is Mercury is agreeing with you that we should relate the times when he's direct to the times that he's retrograde, because that's what he does.
Mm-hmm.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was the same degrees, you said.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. This actually goes perfectly, because the Emerald Tablet is a document that many people misquote erroneously. They say, as above, so below. It doesn't say that. What it what it actually says is that which is above corresponds with that which is below, and that which is below corresponds with that which is above. And so when I saw that these three Mercury alignments are doing the same thing in this mystical tablet, the above, the below, and the above are all one. It's fascinating. And in fact, if we go back here, this order of the retrogrades through the elements is in the same document, this Emerald Tablet. The sun is its father, that's fire. Moon is its mother, water. Wind carries in its belly, that's the earth. Air, and then earth is its nurse. Yeah, that's earth. So this document I found to be actually very, rather than just esoteric, it's also very exoteric, very astronomical. But without dwelling too much, I can just say that if you want to know more about all that, you can get the book from my publisher at Rebido. It was released about a year ago. And it's also on Amazon if you prefer to shop that way.
Thank you.
So as I said, the only time we have in the 125 years of ephemerides that I created, these tables, the only time we have Sun and Mercury in an inferior conjunction along with Jupiter in Sagittarius is in 1971. And so I did as Mr. Oner did, and as many of us astrologers are trained to do, I went back to look at my history, and I see a couple things. With regard to the economics that we were talking about before, my history agrees with Mr. Doser's history that there was a devaluation of the dollar back in 1971. That was a direct result of going off the gold standard, yeah, and there were pretty severe economic repercussions from that.
Interestingly, it was also the last time Mars was retrograde in Aquarius, the same year, 71.
Yes, Mars and Mercury have a similar synodic period of 47 years. That is, that they recur. Also at 79 years, Mars and Mercury events line up at 47 and 79. So yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that till now. Now on the positive side, we saw the release of the first microprocessor in 1971 with Mercury and Jupiter in Sagittarius, and also the release of the first handheld scientific calculator. Some of this is in my article. So I think that on the negative side, there might be a currency issue with the dollar in particular. In fact, Ray Merriman, when I was recently at the Great Lakes Astrology Conference, he said the same thing, though for different reasons, that the dollar might have some issues coming up. On the positive side, there might be some technological breakthroughs that if we get in on the ground floor, we can like be part of something like revolutionary happening, and maybe be on for a good ride there. So it's interesting because, you know, the relationship between Mercury and Jupiter, I talk about this also in my article a bit, because they rule opposite signs, they can be seen to be, you know, very much in tension to one another. But actually, mythologically, if we think about them, there's this idea in modern astrology that that Mercury is an octave of Uranus, right? That they are very similar. But in mythology, Mercury is much more an octave of Jupiter. He's literally carries out the orders of Jupiter. So if we think of Mercury as an octave with Jupiter, we can see the more positive side with the technological advancements. If we think of them as ruling opposite signs, we can see that tension and the devaluation of the dollar. And I think we are likely to see both of these energies present in different ways during this next alignment.
Well, it's also the rational mind and the more abstract or spiritual.
Yes. Yes, and if they are not in accord, that can be very
Yeah.
disruptive. But when they are in accord, that can be tremendously helpful. Yeah. So yeah, November 27th. Now, what's really interesting to me about this alignment is that if you know your traditional astrology, these are the three planets who happen to have what we call essential dignity in the first part of Sagittarius. So in a day chart, and most of us are diurnal beings, we live our lives in the daytime. In a day chart, the sun has triplicity dignity. What that means is like Mr. Doser was saying earlier, Sagittarius is it's a masculine sign, it's a fire sign, so that the masculine planets agree with the nature of the sign, yeah? So the sun has triplicity dignity there. Then we have these things that are called terms or bounds, and there's different systems for these, but for the one I use, Jupiter rules the first 12 degrees there, and Mercury rules the first 10 degrees of the first decanate or face of. So these are the three planets that have essential dignity in this first part of Sagittarius, and they're all three coming together. So I actually think that this could be a good time for people who to consciously elect to initiate activities, Sagittarian activities, Jupiterian activities, Mercurial activities, teaching, schools, websites, these kind of things. Because of the inherent dignity that these planets have in this sign, you can look for...
So when is that? What's the date range?
The date range, it's really all of December and even some of January. You'll have these three planets together. But right before Christmas is my favorite time that I point out in the article. You have Jupiter and Mercury come together on that star that you mentioned, Antares, which is a magical star. And I think that that's a really wonderful opportunity for electional opportunities. Also, there's something to, this is, again, another topic that I could probably do a whole day on. This is what Arielle was referencing with Venus. I've looked at these shapes that the planets make when they're retrograde. And thanks to a German astrologer by the name of Hinze, I was able to figure out that these shapes that he identified are driven by the location of the planetary nodes. So that when Mercury is in Scorpio, the place of its north node, it makes a Z-shaped loop rising across the ecliptic, rising from south to north latitude. That's what a node is. It's the place where the planet's orbit crosses the ecliptic, yeah? And because Sagittarius is the next sign, this is the shape that Mercury will make. And what's fascinating about this is that Mercury will be going along here relatively parallel to the ecliptic, direct motion, so relatively normal. Then it will station retrograde, and boom, it will go, it will be rising. It will be, and at one point it will cross the ecliptic and be moving, it will be north latitude and gaining latitude. This is a, in the classical text, this is a condition of dignity, north latitude and rising. So in the midst of the retrograde, which we think of formally, explicitly or implicitly, we think of as bad or negative, Mercury will actually be gaining in latitude, and they'll make it, this alignment will happen very close in the vertical dimension. I did this diagram the day after so that you can actually see each one of these dots, but if we bring them back together, they'll be, you know, right there, very close to the ecliptic, all three of these planets. This is not the norm. Sometimes one planet can be way up here, sometimes the other one will be on the other side of the ecliptic even, yeah? So this is a powerful alignment because of this factor also, that they're very close in latitude and very close in proximity vertically as well as horizontally.
Which software is that you're using?
I use a software. It's called. Let me make sure I get this right. It's called Sky Map Lite. It's an astronomy software. It's not astrology. But it will generate these tracks, and you can find different astronomy software that will show you the tracks of the planets like this. But you'll notice that actually Mercury will station around 4 December, and then it will begin to lose. When it goes direct, it begins to lose latitude. It begins to, so this is a weakening actually. So this retrograde is interesting because in the middle of the retrograde, maybe Mercury is stronger, and then when it goes direct, maybe it's actually weaker in terms of.
My question is, why is southern latitude weaker than northern latitude?
That's a really good question, and we can only assume the answer. But what we do know for sure is that northern latitude planets are much easier to see, because when the ecliptic rises across the horizon like this, yeah, if the planet is down here, it's closer to the horizon, it's harder to see. When it's on the other side of the ecliptic, much more visible. So I think they took this as visibility is agency, it's power in the world, yeah. And
but
so
this can maybe be interpreted as it's going to be stronger in the north for northern hemisphere people and vice versa.
yeah, well, that's a really good question too. And that also gets into the question of why the heck does astrology work in Australia when it was based on all this northern hemisphere stuff. And my personal answer to that question is that many people that live in Australia actually their cultural heritage is from the north. So it works for them because culturally they are from the north. That's my personal answer. If I were going to consult someone who was a native southern hemisphere person and their family is from, I would say I recommend you consult an indigenous system. That I'm not the guy for you because my system is northern hemisphere based. That's my personal answer. Yeah. But it is a quandary because it's flipped. It's flipped down there. And the scorpion, right? Instead of having a tail that goes like this, it looks like this.
I travel a lot south, so
I bet
I'm questioning these. So thank you, Gary. Do you have last
yeah, this is the chart briefly for the political. This is the chart for the moment of the conjunction at Washington, D.C., and you'll notice that it's in the second house, which is financial, and it's square to Mars and Neptune. And the fifth house in mundane is typically associated with the upper house of the government. So in our country, this is the Senate. In England, it would be the House of Lords. It's possible that the major issue in the election will be if the economy does hold, then or if the economy does not hold, there could be ramifications for the Senate, is what I see there. And it's interesting also because Mercury rules the 11th house, which would be the opposite, which would be the House of Representatives, right? It would be the lower house, which is the House of Representatives. And so I think that actually the main issue, believe it or not, for the election is the economy. And I don't mean that as in that's my opinion, that's my political opinion. That's what the astrology is saying, is that the economy is the main issue that will actually have an effect on the election. And this is where you can find me at dreamastrologer.com. I invite you to keep in touch with me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Very enlightening.
Okay.
And wonderful as we proceed from the underground of Venus retrograde in Scorpio to the heights of Jupiter in Sagittarius, we now move to the nodes in Cancer Capricorn on an 18-month cycle, moving from Leo Aquarius to Cancer Capricorn. And we are fortunate to have astrologer Lynn Bell, who he lives in France, but I believe he's originally from the United States, present about the transition of the node and this fascinating cycle. So Lynn is speaking, has tremendous background in mythology and psychological astrology, and we are really excited to hear more about this, especially since the node moving to Cancer Capricorn and Pluto Saturn are traveling during that same time in those signs. Thank you, Lynn. I'm trying to unmute you. Here you are.
Okay, am I unmuted? There
Yes.
we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Maurice. And I'm going to launch my, there we go, launch my slide presentation. But first, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to listen to my colleagues and this extraordinary work that everyone has done, particularly on the synodic cycles, is fascinating. Now, I don't normally talk about the sign changes of the nodal axis. It's very unusual for me. And I think if I proposed it, it is because of the connection to Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. And I will be talking more about the South Node today and less about the North Node. First of all, the reason that this grabbed my attention was this long passage this summer of the nodal axis, the South Node with Mars, and the eclipse cycle with Mars. And it was so powerful for me personally, and I'm sure for many people who are listening to this call and many people in this room. As Arielle said, it's been an extremely difficult time, and there are many reasons we can talk about this. So I don't normally think about the nodes collectively, but this time I think we must think about the nodes collectively because they are inaugurating a whole series of transits that get more and more powerful during 2019 and 2020. Of course, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And we'll be looking at that a little bit. Now, I put up this image because, as many of you know, when you map eclipses around the globe over a series of 19 years, you actually see the shadow of the eclipses encircling the globe like a serpent. Now, how the ancients knew this, I mean, we have satellites, how ancient civilizations knew about this serpentine pattern, especially because eclipses on other parts, especially with solar eclipses, which are very difficult to find and in unusual places, I have no idea. But it's clear, I think one of the clues may be the image that Gary just showed of Mercury's relationship with its planetary node and the Z shape, which of course immediately made me think of the nodal serpentine shape.
Now, we're not seeing your slides, Lynn. Are you?
You're not.
No.
I can't imagine why. They worked perfectly. They're on my
screen. You share your screen.
Yes, I did share my screen. Okay, let me see again. Share screen. So when I click on, I want to share Keynote. Okay.
All right.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you see that now?
Yes.
And if I play, oops, that's not what I want. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes, yes.
How embarrassing, you're looking at this really messy, globby screen instead of my Keynote.
No worries.
Yes, so now I noticed when Oner put up his chart for the entry of Jupiter into, I noticed that programs don't calculate the nodes in the same way. And here I put the dates where the mean lunar nodes change sign. I use EO, which is a Mac software, and these are the dates it gave me. My ephemeris gives me November 7th for the passage of the true node. November 7th, which is very close to the US election, of course. So we can look at somewhere into this period. Now, I tend to think that the nodal axis shifting sign is a very inward experience. I was very influenced in my thinking on the nodes by Alexander Ruperti, who wrote about the fact that the nodes go backwards and that we even need to consider the passages of the nodes in the houses of our charts in a reverse order. So that, for example, the nodes passage in the 12th house is actually its first house, and the 11th house is actually its second house, and the third. So, which is a very interesting idea and hard to grasp, but the nodes call us in a different direction. They always call us against the grain of the other planets, except when the other planets are moving retrograde, which is what Gary and Arielle were talking about. And they call us into an internal space. And I tend to think that the presence of the nodes is revealed in the world during the eclipses, because the eclipses are the only moments where this cycle is made visible. However, there are a number of key points in this cycle. So one of the things about the South Node going into Capricorn, and I'm sure that many people will be talking about this, is this activation of our own inward patterns of control, our patterns of holding things the way they always have been. I was recently teaching about how Saturn swallows his children, okay? And how the past, which is one of the reasons I chose this image of the movement of the snake swallowing its own tail, because this is, of course, a possibility with the nodes. We do not know what the serpent's tail is going to flick down, knock down, bring up. One way of thinking about this passage. So my original thought, and I think the nodes call us to very powerful inward work. And of course, all the evolutionary schools of astrology have developed this to a high degree. That as the nodes go into Capricorn, all our tendencies to close into a rigid pattern, all right, become activated. Now, another way to think of this, so another Capricorn pattern, of course, is to get to the top. This is actually the image of a temple in Thailand. So it isn't at all about the planetary nodes as far as I can tell, but I like this idea of something climbing and climbing and climbing, where the North Node is pulling us into a very powerful, intimate and inward space, into a dreamscape, into a place of enfolding the sign of Cancer, a place of fertilization and fecundity. And on a soul level, I think we are asked to look at what it is that is looking to be born and what it is out in the world that has grown too big, too powerful, too strong, and too dominant. Now, this nodal pattern, again, as I said, the eclipse cycles always reveal what the nodes are working on. And just a couple of thoughts, which I didn't mention in the article, as the nodes were going through Leo and Aquarius, although the North Node is in Leo, groupthink, collective patterning, the social media as a form of group manipulation, Okay, we've seen in many different directions that there's actually a tendency to be herded by our values and beliefs into a kind of groupal thinking process, whereas the nodes North Node in Leo calls for a kind of individual courage. So now as the North Node goes into Cancer, which many, and Capricorn, Cancer, the signs that we call the gateway of the soul, let's say, there is a whole new cycle which is beginning to gestate, is what I would say. Also, when we look at we know that the nodes are called serpents or dragons. And of course, that brought to mind, this is the image of Asclepius's rod. And of course, the caduceus forms a double serpentine pattern. So we can also see the node as that. So we can think of this as the rod, what's striking, what's moving in us and asking for healing, the nodal passages. And I think, Maurice, you work very much in that way, that the South Node is actually inviting things to come up to be healed in the collective and in the individual. Now, I just thought I'd put up the last 3 dates again. These are mean node dates generated by my program, when the North Node entered Cancer and the South Node Capricorn. And the first one, June 3rd, 1944, is really striking because it's 3 days before the D-Day landing, which turned the tide of World War II in favor of the Allies, where you could say that the beginning of the return home comes and the war ends. The ability of particularly soldiers in the European theater during this North Node in Cancer, the war ended and people were able to return home, if you like, after being. So it's just one thought and I think that sign changes of the node can work either way. They can either bring up a Capricorn problem or a Cancerian event. And on January 14th, 1963, George Wallace was elected as governor of Alabama on a platform of segregation, then segregation, now segregation forever. In other words, the old system which will never be let go of. The only thing I could see in 81, and this is the day of, was the appointment of the first woman to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. And this notion of the rise of the feminine, all right, in the collective, in honoring the feminine and the collective through the appointment of the first woman justice of the Supreme Court. And I'm sorry to be so America-centric in these examples, but that's what I have for you for now. 2000, I didn't quite come up with anything, but it's there for your reflection. Now, one of the most important reasons that this cycle of the nodal axis is so powerful is that it coincides with Pluto's North Node, very close to the time with Pluto's North Node. So the Moon's node and Pluto's North Node will both be in Capricorn. And as we know, Pluto is in Capricorn. So Pluto already crossed its North Node in July of 2018, and the next crossing, as you can see, is January 5th, 2019. Now, what does this mean? If you look at this diagram, which comes from the NASA website, the last time Pluto was conjunct its node in this says 1931, but it's 1930 as well, was when Pluto was discovered. So there's an alignment between Pluto and our solar system, you could say, our relationship with Pluto and our solar system when Pluto crosses its own node. and this is the last time Pluto crossed its node. It was 1930-31, and July of this year, and January 5th of 2019.
So I just want to just quickly clarify what the Pluto nodes are for the audience, for those who may not know. So every planet will have its own nodal axis. We often talk about the moon's nodes, and here Lynn is referring to the nodes of the moon coinciding with the nodes of Pluto. And the nodes of Pluto travel between 2 degrees, 29 to 19 Cancer Capricorn. And so Pluto is right on its own nodes, where the moon nodes will also be.
Yeah, it's actually, thank you, Maurice. And actually, Gary in his presentation mentioned Mercury in Scorpio is close to its node, if I'm remembering correctly, which is, again, why it's losing latitude, because it's conjunct its node. It's crossing the ecliptic at that time. So that might not be a weakness. I seem to think it's right in our face, this Pluto. That's how I think of it. And just a clarification, Maurice, the north node of Pluto is 21 Cancer, and the south node is 9, sorry, I think I reversed these. No, north node 21 Cancer.
Yeah, no, it's correct.
South node 19 Capricorn. And the difference in the degrees is because of the elliptical orbit of Pluto, that when it cuts the ecliptic, it isn't exactly aligned. So, okay, so I just thought to give us a little picture of how this all comes together is, this is the January 19th new moon set for Paris. But if I set it for for North America, it will actually be January 5th, the day that Pluto crosses its node. We will have a new moon at 15 degrees of Capricorn, conjunct Saturn, midpointing basically Saturn and Pluto. So we could say that this moment is a very powerful moment where not just where we may see some of these issues of power and abuse of power emerge very powerfully in the collective in some way. Now, and when I was initially thinking about this, I was thinking, this doesn't sound like fun. The south node coming to Pluto, Pluto coming to its own node, and then followed by the south node coming to Saturn. This doesn't sound like fun, just like this summer wasn't fun. So my story with the Mars south node was that I'd been carrying a certain infection in my tear duct in my body for quite a long time, which had to be dealt with. And during the Mars passage, I had surgery, and very successful surgery, by the way. But I could literally see, as Mars turned direct, the inflammation leave my face. Right, literally see it disappear. I always think of what Lee Lehman once said to me about the South Node, which is, it's just, she said, well, you know, when you go into the bathroom and you flush the toilet, that's how I think of the South Node. And that's always stayed with me, and others here have probably heard that. But it may be that this is an opportunity to get rid of a lot of baggage in our own psyches, in our own histories, that we really don't need to carry around. And seeing such a powerful lineup, and in the collective as well, again, what we don't know is, will these old archaic patterns dominate and bring more and more of this powerful energy, a light in the world, which is, I think, what many of us expect with the incoming Saturn-Pluto conjunction? Or is this period of the nodal axis and the eclipses an opportunity to empty out certain things, and to heal. Right.
So, Lynn, would you agree with the notion that, in a way, both nodes need to be balanced and integrated together as an axis? Or would you say, is the Cancer balancing this Capricorn intensity and possible abuse of power with a more gentle approach? Or is it, that we need to get rid of these Capricorn and embrace the vulnerability?
Look, I normally, first of all, I think there are different ways of talking about the nodes over a lifetime. Of course, we're looking for balance. But at a particular moment, and especially with so much power accumulating around the south node of the moon and Pluto's south node, it really does feel as if something is being asked to be eliminated. Okay?
Yeah.
It's as if, and at the same time, it comes up incredibly powerfully, just as the nodal movement makes the eclipse visible. It comes up incredibly powerfully and becomes even more visible, even like 30 stories high, because it's connected to such dominant planets. Yeah, I'd be very interesting to hear how my colleagues see this, and whether your intuition is this something to be afraid of, or is it the moment that the scary monster appears only to be removed. And one of the things that gave me hope, and I used your chart, Maurice, was, we're going back, just like Oner, talk about Martin Luther, Martin Luther, clearly the man of the moment. Because one of the last two times that Pluto crossed its own node, and was also aligned with the lunar nodes. See, I get confused here. Here it is, conjunct the lunar node, was in 1517, which was the year that the Reformation began. Most of you know that the theses were nailed to the door of a church in Germany, which began Reformation. But for those of you who don't know history, what's important here is that this was a challenge to something that had existed and that had been corrupted and gathered great power over centuries, over a millennia, more than a millennia. And the whole system was corrupt in some way. And this was a challenge to this, saying we have to clean this out. So what Martin Luther was proposing, which Oner was talking about, something about 5 years down the road, where he was actually excommunicated. And I don't know if you know, but the Catholic Church issued a fatwa. They said if you killed Martin Luther, it would not be a sin and you would not go to hell. All right, so that's how powerful this was. They realized that he was definitely the enemy. And here you can see this is very similar. There's an incoming Saturn. Saturn is still in Sagittarius here, but there's an incoming Saturn-Pluto conjunction linked to the nodes. Now, it doesn't happen in quite the same order this time, but I found this one fascinating. Now, if you live through this time...
And Uranus in Taurus too.
And Uranus in Taurus too. And this is where people, in a way, said it needs to be, if the world shouldn't, they basically wanted to knock down and get rid of structures. A lot of churches were burnt down. A lot of pictures of saints were burnt. The Reformation got rid of the saints and the Virgin Mary and all kinds of various doodads, which, from a feminine point of view, was maybe not great. Like, I often go to Chartres, and there's a Madonna who used to be black there. Oops, it says my internet connection is unstable. Okay.
We're still on the chart of Luther.
Okay, good. But I was just talking about the elimination of the feminine from the church, which is one of the things that happened here, which you would not expect with the North Node in Cancer, right? However, what this process did do was bring people inward to their own conscience and to their own feeling of what was right, what was divine, what was spiritual, and away from outer authority. So in that sense, it took things away from the external image and to an inner image. And right now, you know, it's very hard, and it's true for me as well, for us to look at the news or the media without immediately having an opinion which we think is our own, but which is not, right? So what's very, very important during the nodal passage in Capricorn is to pull our energy away from outward authority towards a more inner directed and spiritual authority, which is always within us.
You say with Saturn moving into Capricorn to do that?
Yes, because the node is in.
I see. Wonderful.
Okay, so that the balance is not, it's not necessarily visible externally, right? Again, the North Node is moving us internal. The South Node is basically out in the world. The Capricorn is out in the world. It's what we've built. It's what we see. It's the accretions of time and history and civilization.
And so we have a comment here from Victoria who says the 500-year return involved Jupiter moving into Sagittarius, Saturn into Capricorn, Uranus in Taurus, Neptune in Pisces, and Pluto in Capricorn. So basically 500 years ago, a little, you know, around the 1520s,
yes,
all the
yes.
outer planets were in the same place. Amazing.
Yes, that's right. My colleague in front, Darby Costello, has done a lot of work on the previous period, the Renaissance, and how the outer planets were similar to the late 20th century, to the generation born after World War II, and how there's a kind of flowering in that period. And here again, there's a kind of wrestling with the forms that we are building on a social world. And the world fell apart. This was the beginning of 100 Years' War. This is not, the world split into dividing camps about which the right way was to go. Of course, we have the conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius, which may give us hope or may not. Let's see where it goes. Two important dates in this process are the dates when the lunar node, now again, this is not the planetary node, Pluto conjuncts its planetary node January 5th with that new moon, and Pluto will conjunct the moon's south node March 28th, 2019, and Saturn will conjunct, or we could say it's the other way around, the south node of the moon will conjunct Saturn May 20th. So within a very short period of time, we have the south node pulling in Pluto and the south node pulling in Saturn. Now, Maurice, you're an evolutionary astrologer. So for you, someone born with Pluto south node or Saturn south node has a huge amount of work to do on a soul level, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
I wonder what people born in this period are going to be like.
I mean, it is, you know, it is like you were mentioning earlier on, referring back to the 1930s, when Pluto was on its own nodes, and I believe also on the lunar nodes. It's both extremely transformative, but it's also the time when we discovered Pluto.
Yes.
So there was, you know, something much of a revelation, as well as, you know, the beginning of the Second World War and the economic problems and fascism rising. So a lot of destruction and intensity, but also breakthroughs.
Yeah, so we could say that there is a period of bringing to the light hidden structures that may be that may have more influence over us than we think, for example. And here I'm not on any side of this. I'm not on any side of any conspiracy theory here, but I cannot look at this nodal passage without thinking that things are going to be pulled up into visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like a precursor, or I don't know how you would word it, but this is obviously also ahead of the Pluto-Saturn conjunction.
Absolutely. I think the Pluto-Saturn conjunction is in play as of early next year. Look at the chart. Just go back to the chart of that new moon. Isn't the Pluto-Saturn conjunction in play here? It's within a 9-degree orb. And it's certainly going to begin, if we are tracking this, I think that's a remarkable chart. And we could also look at the full moon, which will be an eclipse following, but I thought I'm maybe not going to give too much information yet, because you'll be looking at these again, I imagine, in another OPA Live down the road. One other thing I wanted to say here is that the USA Pluto, a lot of people are talking about the US Pluto return, which doesn't happen until 2022. But the USA Pluto is at 27 degrees 33 Capricorn, and the South Node will actually conjunct that degree on January 1st. So we're already, and that is one of the reasons I'm talking particularly about the US, but where these power struggles are happening. I don't really know. The last time, another time, after 1517, and I didn't put the chart in here, the time that Pluto was conjunct, Pluto was in Capricorn, conjunct the moon's node, was 1777, in the second year of the US War for Independence, where again, this whole idea of how do we keep what we have? How do we decide, or do we let outside forces determine and structure the world for us? So I think that is maybe, there are many, many other things we can say about the nodes going into Cancer and Capricorn, but that's what I wanted to talk about today in particular.
Thank you immensely. And everyone, you will be able to review this recording, pay attention to the details, and wait until the equinox, when the articles will be published, and you'll have even greater perspective on all these topics.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much, everyone. And this obviously describes such a busy time, and yet a very powerful time, and we can only be grateful for astrology. Think about the fact that we have the privilege to be able to look at this ahead of time. So even though we may not predict exactly what's going to happen, we can be prepared. We are already psychologically exposed to this cycle, and maybe have an opportunity to be better aligned with the intentions, whether it is to eliminate, whether it is to do this shadow work, whether it is to pay attention to our excesses with Jupiter. And such is the amazing value of astrology. I think it can serve us very well as both a prevention practice and something that gives us the deeper intention for every time, whether it's an opportunity or it's a crisis. And obviously, I would like to thank all of you. The panelists to begin with, who's done a wonderful, generous contribution and sharing, and all of you participants who took the time to join us. We were close to 100 gathered here. And pay attention also, we will screen Julia's video. We're running now out of time to do that, but I had a sense, we would. So it's a great opportunity once again that we can review all of this at our own leisurely time at the comfort of our own home. So Julia has presented a whole slideshow and explanation about the Venus cycle, complementing a lot of what Arielle was speaking about. So you'll get all of this in your email inbox. Thank you, everyone, and may we all be safe and guided as we sail through these Plutonian waters.
Maybe you can turn their microphones off so they can say goodbye, on so they can say goodbye.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks for viewing. Thanks again, all the other panelists. Fascinating material. Thank you.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Maurice.